Aloha and welcome to Line in the Sand, a program where we talk about invasive species and learn about things that are being done to protect Hawaii. My name is Christy Martin and I'll be your host. Today's program, we're going to be talking about the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle, or CRB as they're sometimes called. We're going to learn about this non-native beetle and their impact on Hawaii's coconut trees. And we have 4 guests with us today to help us learn about the issue. We have with us Darcy Oishi, who is with the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. He's actually the Biocontrol Section Chief, but he's also leading the command, the Incident Response Command for Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle. We have Lieutenant Colonel Kurt Mueller, who is with Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, and he is on the military side of the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle response. We have with us Dr. Mike Melzer, who is with the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, or CTAR. And we also have Kylie Tam, who is with the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle response. She's in charge of outreach. So thank you so much to my panelists. Thank you for being here today and sharing your mana'o. What we're going to do is start off learning a little bit about the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle. Where is it native to and how did it get to Hawaii? Just a little bit about setting the stage for this information. And I've asked Darcy to start us off with that information. So Darcy, can you tell us a little bit about CRB?
The Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle is native to South Asia. And beginning in about 2007, we saw some movement in the Pacific, first to Guam. And then it's a new invasive biotype that's been spreading, and it wound up making its way to Hawaii in 2013 on December 23rd, so nice holiday present. We had been collaborating with UH and the US Department of Agriculture, monitoring programs for beetle palm pests, and the beetle was one of our targets, and we caught it in a single trap on the 23rd, and we subsequently ramped up our programs and detected more beetles in the course of a few days. And after Christmas, we did find a breeding site at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, specifically attached to the golf course at Mamala Bay Golf Course. And at that point, we knew we had a serious problem on our hands, and we launched what we call an incident command system to tackle and address the program, since this beetle is one of the most invasive pest species and highly destructive to palms as a whole.
So can you tell us, now you had mentioned a little bit, so they're native to Southeast Asia, and you folks detected it. What exactly is the problem that it causes for palms?
So it attacks palms by the adults feed on the crown, so they'll burrow into the top of the crown, and this will result in a unique V-cut damage that is characteristic, although can be mistaken for tree trimmer or even rat damage. There's a few other things that could cause something similar, and but even though it's called the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle, it hits a wide range of palms, including Phoenix palms, Manila palms, oil palms, date palms, and in very heavy infestations, it will attack crop plants like banana, papaya, taro even, and that's just the adult. The immature stages, the keiki, live in green waste or compost or nutrient-rich soil, and that's how they move. Most of the big movements have occurred because it's much harder to detect at that point in time.
So, okay, let me get this straight. So the adults are up in the trees and they burrow through. Do they bite through the hearts of the top of the tree?
They're chewing and at the same time using their muscular front legs to pull tissue apart.
Yeah, I've seen them on the news. You say they're large. Can you show us?
So they're about 2 to. So when people think of a large beetle, we're not talking like a B-52 cockroach. This is a much bigger, beefier beetle. It's about a good size one will be about that big, so 2.5 inches. And they do have a unique horn, which both the males and females have it, so it's pretty easy to identify. They are also nocturnal, and we get a lot of calls for a related species, a cousin, called the Oriental flower beetle, but that one has white spots on it, and this one is much bigger. It is not something that you could easily kill with a slipper.
So we're dealing with a night active beetle that the adults are up in the palms, and I typically wouldn't see it because it's inside the palm. Is that correct?
Yes, for what we know is the beetle activities are pretty much in the palm or in the breeding material, which is typically in Hawaii in the ground. So, or more appropriately, soil or green waste. So the amount of interaction that you'll have, as long as we have it under control, should be very minimal.
So these beetles, they're flying up into the palm trees and they're digging through there. What are they doing up there?
So yeah, what the beetles do is that they fly at night to go feed on the palms, and so they'll dig in with their front claws and then start chewing and sucking the juices of the palm crowns.
Palm vampires.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so they suck the juices like vampires, and then the material that they can't digest or get nutrients is left behind, and we call it chew. It looks like someone had been chewing tobacco or something like that and kind of left their mess.
So when they dig into these palm trees and they're sucking the juice out, I am imagining it sickens the palm tree. Does the tree die?
What we're finding is through the course of our response, we've had only about 5 trees that have been taken down that look like would have died from the beetle. And so a palm can take a lot of damage before the beetle kills it. And in most cases, once we get to managing and eliminating the core population of beetles, the palm actually can recover. So this is, it'll look ugly for a bit, and what we're finding is human tolerances for the aesthetics of palms is lower than the palm's ability to recover from damage.
Okay, we want our palms to look good. That's what I'm getting from that. But I've heard from other areas in the Pacific that they're really damaging and can kill a lot of palms.
Yeah, in parts of the Pacific, we're seeing, like one of the most common references is what happened in Guam in the Tumon Bay area, which is like Tumon Bay is our Waikiki. And they cut down 50% of their palms within the first few years of their program. But that was largely, again, for cosmetic reasons. But we have seen in other areas that Palau, Fiji, parts of Fiji, where we are having current invasion, Solomon Islands, where at heavy infestations, they do kill the trees, and fairly quickly. But this is not the situation that we have here. Due to the ongoing response, we've been keeping it from reaching those proportions where we see that type of damage, which is actually resulting in directly attributable death from the beetle.
I see. Okay, well, I'm going to go back to just some biology questions because it's hard to imagine how, just a few beetles can lead to such a big problem. So when the adult beetles are ready, they go down to the mulch pile or compost or whatever it is, and what do? They lay their eggs there?
They have a party there. Basically, there's a collection of usually a collection of adults having sex, making babies. So a female can produce about 80 eggs in her life, and
wow.
That in turn so and the eggs hatch, and we're still working out the life cycle, and it's on the order of months before we get an adult, and at least in Hawaii. And so all of that is happening in mulch piles, in compost, in just collection of waste. Here at what we've seen in the project, we've managed to take care of every single known breeding site. We're just presented with a lot of unknowns now as to where all the breeding activity really is. And we found a few trees that were actually infested with living, the tree was still living, and it was home to beetle larvae that was tunneling away inside of it, like essentially like a parasite living inside the crown of the tree.
Wow. So the rules that you set up initially, the adults go up to the trees and feed on the sap, and they come down to the compost pile or the mulch pile and lay their eggs to then turn into 80 babies over the course of a lifetime. How long do they live?
Probably over a year.
Okay, so over the course of, wow, that's a lot of beetles. You've just switched that and say they can even breed up in trees.
Yeah, and we're still learning, and one of the things that we keep in mind when dealing with emergency situations and biological invasions is oftentimes what we know about an organism where it naturally occurs plays out differently in areas where they invade.
Wow.
So we try not to adhere to what we firmly believe as science fact and keep an open mind, because other things do happen. And it wasn't really in the literature that breeding occurs inside of crowns of living tree tissue. We knew that it can, if you're not manicuring a tree and there's a lot of rubbish up on top in the palm, that could create a breeding site. Mm-hmm. What wasn't known was in apparently healthy tissue, which I personally think there's some linkages to disease that are going on and other things that are causing a palm to be sick but not overtly obviously sick to a non-palm plant species, you know. So the beetle can probably take advantage of certain things in those types of situations that are not normally present.
Well, I saw a few of the slides that you brought, and I think it'll help people understand, you know, when you first detected those beetles in a trap, and then you talked a little bit about a mulch pile at Mamala Bay Golf Course. Do you have some photos of that you'd like to share?
Yeah, and so here we have actually kind of like a before and after shot of what happened. So Mamala Bay Golf Course was actually trying to do the ecologically correct and green thing. They had along their fence line some kiave trees that kept essentially blocking the flight path and obscuring the tower for FAA at Honolulu International Airport. So in order to prevent the repeated use of pesticides, they decided to create a mulch pile which accumulated palm waste, which turned out to essentially creating a paradise for the beetle in paradise. So this is where it appears was the ground zero, if you will, of the infestation. And we're talking about over 100 feet by about 10, 12 feet by 3 to 5 feet in depth in some places of the accumulation of waste. And at one end there was a massive breeding site which appeared to be linked to a problem in the irrigation system at the time, where there was some water leaking. We wound up removing all of that, and which is what you can see on the second picture on the other side. and that was eventually removed. And once we removed that and destroyed it, the population of the beetles slowly started tapering off that we're catching in the Mamala Bay area.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be a lot of work. And so, what we're going to do here is just take a short break. We're going to turn next to Lieutenant Colonel Kurt Mueller to really talk about this work on Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. And then we are going to learn a little bit more about those research questions that we've heard about. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us. You're watching Line in the Sand, and we are talking today about Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle, or CRB as it's called. We are learning a little bit about how they got to Hawaii and some of the biology that makes this a really interesting and difficult pest to work with. And one of the things that we saw across Oahu, at least, when these pests first started showing up, is we started seeing these strange black lantern-shaped things all over the place. And I get those questions all the time. Hey, what are those? Are they bird feeders, or is it for Oban season? So if I can ask Darcy just to explain to me what was the initial response when these beetles showed up, you found the mulch pile, then what did you do next?
So what happened was, once we found the initial breeding site, we realized we needed to find out how extensive the problem was. So we deployed literally thousands of traps over the course of a year. We kept ramping up the traps. And so the trap consists of essentially a trap, the black and white thing that people see with a light and a lure. And that really helped define where our problem areas were, so we could develop a response. But at the same time, that only is a detection and monitoring tool. It is not a tool to control the populations.
So it's a little bit like our trapper roaches in our kitchens. You can put them out there and know you have roaches, but there's no way you're going to get rid of that population from those traps.
No.
Okay, well, it's good to know. So right now we've got the scene set where we've got this invasion, and I know that it's become a really huge problem. And so if I could ask you, Kurt, to talk a little bit about joint base and sort of what was the response to this issue and some of the efforts that you've done to date.
Absolutely. Well, so currently we have multiple areas that we're responding to this issue on. First of all, most of the coconut rhinoceros beetles will be found on the joint base property. So the military has gone full force into this, and we're responding to it as best as we can, and working directly with Department of Agriculture to make sure that we kill this pest to the best of our abilities. One of the ways we're going at this with is we have a consolidated green waste management plan. What we do is all green waste that is generated on Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam stays on Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam. And we don't create these large mulch piles or things like that. What we do is we either burn the green waste in these cool contraptions called air curtain burners, and we also compost the waste. So we put it in a dumpster, basically, a roll-off dumpster, and it's about 40 cubic yards of material, and we spray ammonia over it, and that causes that green waste to heat up, and it turns into a very good composting material, which isn't very conducive to beetle growth or beetle breeding. And then we take it and we add biosolids to it, and then we spread it across our golf courses and so on and so forth that we have on the joint base.
Wow. So before this problem, I have a green waste bin. I put all my stuff in it. It gets taken to the city and county composting facility, I guess. And why was that the case on joint base prior to this?
So prior to this, yes, it would go to the city and county green waste disposal site, and of course, to prevent further spread of infested material, we want to make sure it all stayed on joint base and was disposed of on joint base.
Yeah.
So we actually had to ramp up quite a bit. We bought 5 air curtain burners, the joint base did, and of course, Department of Agriculture, along with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, bought 1 additional green waste burner. So currently we have 6 green waste burners, or air curtain burners, that we're using on Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam to help dispose of the waste.
Yeah, and so this in-vessel composting unit, I'm kind of curious about that. I know compost heats up pretty well in there. Is that not efficient or not effective enough to kill the beetle eggs or larvae, or why are you using this vessel?
So in-vessel composting, unfortunately, is a little slower process than, of course, the air curtain burner. But one of the problems with the air curtain burner is I can't burn small chipped material. Of course, my grounds maintenance contractors that I have on base, it's easier for them to chip the material than it is to keep it whole for transportation purposes. So when they bring me chipped material, I have to in-vessel compost it to make sure to get it up to about 170 degrees to make sure that it's non-conducive for the beetle to lay eggs in or for the larvae to grow and breed in. It's a very simple process. All we do is we take a 40 cubic yard construction waste dumpster. We fill it with green waste, we blow some air through it, and we pour ammonia over it. And it heats up to about 170 degrees and stays that temperature for several days until we can bring it to our composting site.
I see. Wow, that's absolutely amazing. You couldn't just chip the material and hope that that works. That's not effective?
It does work just chipped, natural decomposition of the material, but you get some side effects with that too, which it smolders and then it starts on fire. So you want to make sure that you do your composting in a enclosed container.
So what comes out of there is pure compost without the biological activity in there, without the creatures.
Well, no, the creatures are added, of course, through nature. The creatures are added, and they keep the compost going, and that's why we bring it out to our compost facility.
Yeah.
So
All but coconut rhinoceros beetle.
all but the coconut rhinoceros beetles,
Oh,
absolutely.
very interesting. I just sort of really appreciate the military's ability to do this on military property. I think it might have been a little bit more challenging had this main large problem been outside of Joint Base, where we don't have as much ability to control all of the movement of materials. And you know, I hate to say it, but it's almost a blessing that it showed up at that property from the public perspective, at least.
I couldn't agree more. Don't get me wrong. I do not like the fact that it is on Joint Base property.
You don't want it to be part of your job.
I don't want it to be part of my job, but I am glad because we do have a lot of control, a lot more control. I can dictate, of course, that everybody needs to dispose of their green waste a certain way. I can force my contractors to, or I can work with my contractors to make sure that they're disposing of the green waste properly and keeping it on the Joint Base versus moving it off the Joint Base. So it's a little, I have a little more control versus other parts of the island.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your work on this. I think
Absolutely.
It's a really interesting and amazing program that's evolved over since end of 2013. So we are going to take a very short break, and when we come back, we're going to learn about some of those research questions that we've been talking about. We've been learning a lot about the beetle, and every time I think we turn around, there's more questions that are added. We're going to talk to one of the researchers about some of these questions. Stay tuned. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Line in the Sand, and we're talking about the coconut rhinoceros beetle today. It is a new beetle that is so far only known to exist on Oahu, and we've been talking a little bit about the biology of the beetle, what they have done to try to contain it, and now we're going to talk a little bit about some of those research questions. Anytime a new species shows up, there's a lot to learn about what does it do typically, how do we control it, how do we hopefully eradicate it. So here to talk about that is Mike Melzer. He's with the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources. So Mike, what are some of the first research questions you had to answer for this project?
How do we get rid of this thing, I guess is the first question is. And so we have, basically right now with the help of Hawaii Department of Agriculture and some of our local support as well, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we have 5 labs that are involved in trying to come up with control methods, and each have their own little approach of doing this. We have some people that are working on, physical control or chemical control or biological control, all different aspects. and see what tools we can develop to help control this thing for both short-term eradication goals, as well as if luck has it that we aren't successful, that we have long-term management strategies. And so part of what we're doing is looking into the Pacific as well to see what other places who have this. They've had the expertise, so we're trying to learn what's worked for them, and see if we can replicate any of that here or develop new tools for ourselves. Probably traditionally biological control is the main method that's been used for this. The primary control agent is actually a virus that's present in most of the South Pacific now. It's been introduced, intentionally introduced into most of these islands, and it's done a fairly good job at controlling the beetle. That sort of changed in Guam. When Guam got this beetle in 2007, when they tried to introduce this virus to kill the beetle, it didn't take. And since it looks like, based on the preliminary genetic work, that the beetle that's here in Hawaii is the same one that's in Guam, we tend to think that the virus probably won't work here as well. So we're looking at other approaches. There's fungi that attack beetles that are being used. So we're trying to find local isolates of this particular fungus that we can use and deploy out into the field. And then there's other labs that are looking at things like nematodes that would actually, little tiny worms that would actually go in and attack the larvae. They work with other beetle species, so that's some of the thing we're working with. And we also have chemical control, which is probably our most ready to use control option right now. These are big beetles, and you need to give them a pretty big dose of pesticide in order to knock them back and kill them. And so finding a way to deliver that to these beetles is a difficulty, in finding the right chemistry that, that we can use for them, that according to the label of the pesticide as well, that's always important. So those are some of the approaches, and then we have some other more experimental approaches using both radiation of some sort, both ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, to maybe sterilize breeding sites, and also as well as sonication to either detect the beetles, because these things are nocturnal, and trying to get an idea of how many are out in the field and when they're active, as well as sonication in terms of actually to destroy the larvae themselves.
Wow.
So there's a lot of different angles going on, and everyone's new to this. Like I said, we're learning with our partners elsewhere in the Pacific, but there's a lot of questions about this beetle.
Yeah, well, that sounds like, some really kind of long-term control projects, even going back to the biological control, which basically is finding the natural enemy partner of this pest from its native range, and then doing this sort of careful testing to make sure it doesn't get away and attack other things. From what I recall, when we had this willy gall wasp problem, that was the fastest ever finding of a natural enemy and testing it to make sure it didn't, escape to other species, and then, the rearing up and the approval to even release it. That was amazingly, speedingly fast, and that was more than 4 years. So are you thinking that, down the line, 4 years from now, that we could potentially, have a nematode or something like that ready? Or what do you think a timeline might be for a natural enemy?
Well, for things that we could find locally, and that's sort of what the focus of several of the labs are, is trying to find something, because right now the range of CRB is quite small, so it hasn't hit different environments where there might be a natural predator or pathogen out there. So there's always that possibility that we might find something locally. And of course that speeds things up, because we're not introducing something new, and releasing that on a larger scale is much more amenable than to bring in something exotic and have to go through all the assays that need to be done to ensure that it's not going to negatively impact the other biota in Hawaii. But there's a few that are promising already. I think there's some nematodes that look like they might work. Or there's some preliminary work, but again, those are a bit more long-term. I think really the immediate is the tool that we might have is the chemical control.
Mm-hmm. And so some of the chemical controls that you're talking about, I just imagine the lifestyle of this beetle. It would be really difficult to spray the beetle, because it's either sucking the sap out of a palm and you can't find it, or it's in the compost in the ground. So what's your best chance of giving it a good squirt, or however you want to control it chemically?
That's true. For chemical control, I think where the researchers are looking at right now is actually injecting the tree. There has been some work to actually rig an apparatus that could actually go up and spray the tree itself, but probably the approach that we're hoping is going to be, it's going to be much easier to work with, is something where you actually put a small hole in the tree and you actually inject the insecticide directly into the tree, and then it spreads up, and then when the beetles come and start feeding on it, they're either stunned or they die after that. So yeah, that's probably the best short-term approach that we have, and it's an interesting way to deliver. But it's been used elsewhere for, it's used for palm before, for other particular diseases that this approach has been used. So theoretically, if we can get enough of that chemical into the palm tree to kill the beetle when it's up there feeding, it hopefully will have a good impact.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. So I have to say that I've heard people talk about this, and I get these comments. Oh, back in the Philippines, we used to throw really fine sand into the trees that really helps to protect the tree. Is there any sort of proof that something simple like that could work?
It apparently has been used effectively in the Philippines. We tried it here. It wasn't as effective as there, but I think a lot of it might have to deal with the particular sand and the actual physical properties of the sand itself. I think it's, whether it's something that, sand is not just sand, there's all sorts of different types of sand. And so whether, one type of sand works particularly better than another, that still could be evaluated. But there was some preliminary trials with sand, and they weren't particularly promising, unfortunately. So whether we're just using the wrong sand, perhaps, I'm not sure.
Interesting. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about, Darcy had told us about the trapping, the traps that get set out. How effective are those at detecting, or what are some of the challenges? We see them everywhere, and we kind of think that the beetle is so widespread because we see the traps all over. And if they're just used for monitoring, I'm wondering, have we evaluated the efficacy here for those?
Yeah, well, it's difficult because our populations are so much lower than in other parts of the Pacific, because the response has been doing such a good job in keeping these populations low. When you've got a small population, it's really hard to evaluate how effective that trap particularly is. So some of the best trap efficacy work is being done in other places like Guam, where they have a really high population density. As Darcy mentioned, these traps, we're not going to be able to trap out the population. The recovery rate with these traps is like 5%. If you were to release some beetles, you've got about a 5% chance of getting them again. So they're only detecting a very small part of the population. So they're more, again, as mentioned, as somewhere just to figure out where, if any, new populations should arise. Or they can also, give us a metric as to how well the response is going. Okay, we did some work over here. We employed a control method over here. Did the levels start to go down after a while? So that's another valuable asset that these traps do, is that they sort of give us a continuous catch. There is some work to improve. We do have one of our scientists is working on improving the different types of lures. As mentioned, there's both a chemical and a light lure for these traps. And so one of our scientists, our colleagues, is working on developing perhaps a better light lure that might be more effective at bringing these
better
beetles
light
in.
lure.
A better light
Interesting.
lure, yes.
Is the pheromone, so it's a chemical lure, I'm assuming it's a pheromone lure, so they smell this and it's like Chanel No. 5 for beetles, or?
I guess there is an aggregate lure. It's probably not the best, because the trap efficacy isn't very high compared to some other traps, insect traps that are out there. But it's better than nothing, and so it's helpful. Trying to find a better chemistry to put into that lure is definitely a high priority as well, because that would really, being able to get more and more adults out of the environment is definitely going to help our cause. So yeah, any work to try and develop a better lure is obviously always most welcome.
Well, thank you for your work on this.
Yes.
We are going to take a very short break, and when we come back, we're going to learn about the current status of the work going on. We're going to hear from Kylie Tam, who's going to talk to us about just current events with this coconut rhinoceros beetle. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Line in the Sand, and we're talking about Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle. We are going to talk finally about current status of this CRB in Hawaii, actually in Oahu. And to tell us a little bit more about what's going on there, we have Kylie Tam. Kylie, what is the status, and what do you folks do on a day-to-day basis that helps protect this island and Oahu?
Mm-hmm. So definitely trapping adult beetles is one of the biggest parts of our program. Currently we have a little over 2,800 traps around the island, but just because you have one in the front of your house or down the street doesn't mean that the beetles are in the area. We have them all around the island, and it's, as explained earlier, it is a monitoring system. So it's really just telling us where the boundaries are, maybe a little bit about what, the densities, the population densities, and it also helps us to find some of the possible breeding sites for the beetle. So as I said, there's 2,800 traps, and we have removed a little over 3,000 beetles from the population to date. So since the program has started a little over 2 years ago. We also have traps on some of the ports on the other islands, just to make sure that they're not getting over to the other islands. As explained, it is currently only on Oahu, so we want to make sure it stays there, hopefully. So a couple of other things that our field crews do day to day, we go around looking at trees. The damage on the trees is very evident. So our crews go around looking for those typical V-cuts, the boreholes. For sure, the boreholes tell us that it is 100% coconut rhinoceros beetle. So we monitor these types of damages on a regular basis. And to date, we've looked at over 200,000 palms around the island. So we're really trying to make sure and that we take a look at as many as possible, even in areas that we don't see a population. We just want to make sure that even though whether we know the traps are efficient enough or not, that's always, of course, the damage is another way that we can tell if there's beetles in the area. Another thing that we do, we check for mulch piles, green waste piles. This is obviously the potential breeding sites. So currently we have them on a scheduled basis where we physically go in and we dig through all these piles to look for any signs of coconut rhinoceros beetle. So eggs, larvae, even beetles. And if we do find anything, more than likely we would put a netting over it. So the netting, we use like a Tekken netting, so it's about an inch to an inch and a half eyes. This will prevent beetles from coming in and out of the piles. And then so currently, as you know, we've explained, for all the breeding sites that we have found to have life stages of coconut rhinoceros beetle, they have all been mitigated, meaning that we have eliminated all of the beetles or larvae from those piles, and we constantly check them, and thus we have not found any more life stages in those piles. So another thing that we have also been doing is that, once again, there's two populations, main populations. There's a population that has started and has grown on Joint Base Pearl Harbor land. There's also a smaller population out in the Nanakuli area. So this population, we have detected it in December of 2014. So it's been out there for about a year and a half. It is an unstable population, a much smaller population in a very tight area. So as Nanakuli is a very different type of land, as you know, Lieutenant Colonel Mueller has explained, he has a lot of control because it's on Joint Base Pearl Harbor. He can dictate how things are moving. This is obviously not the case in Nanakuli.
Can't do that in Nanakuli, can you?
Yeah, I can't tell them to do what they can and can't do out there. It's all private properties. So we've essentially started a grassroots campaign out there. So we've been going door to door, asking for access to be able to do inspections of trees, to be able to look for possible breeding sites. And thus far, the community out there has been very cooperative, and they're in allowing us to do these kinds of activities, even setting up traps on their properties that we have to come and check quite often. But we really want to nip that one in the butt before it gets to be a really big problem. And also to note that we still haven't found a breeding site in Nanakuli.
Wow.
And since it's been, past its life cycle, so we know that there's something out there. So we're heavily still trying to find where these beetles can be breeding out there.
So can I ask you, that Nanakuli population, you found it just from one of those monitoring traps, or how did you detect that?
Yes, so it was found in a trap in December of 2014, and ever since then we really started ramping up deploying a lot of traps, and as I said, since then we just started trying to gain access to all these private properties, and that's mainly what we've been doing out there.
And you're still recovering adult beetles in traps, so there's definitely a breeding site out there
Yes.
somewhere.
Yeah, so we caught just over 50 beetles ever since December of 2014, so they are still out there, and still trying to find where they're coming from, really.
So, like, what are the chances that that was one female laying her 80 eggs and you're just catching out the adults? Probably somewhat small. What about the other areas trapping? Are you still recovering beetles from joint base, or how is that going?
Oh yes, definitely. So as far as the population on base goes, it started at Mamala Bay Golf Course where it had that major breeding site. Ever since then, with our response program and all of the things that we've been doing, such as mitigating that green waste and trapping, finding areas and trying to eliminate the possibility of them becoming breeding sites, we have seen actually a shift of the population, and it is actually moved to Iroquois Point area, so a little bit westerly. And so Iroquois Point has been our hardest hit area currently, and more so in a housing area. And so we are definitely trying to get the community involved in awareness. And so currently, once again, there is no breeding site that we know of on that property as well. So we are still trying to find things, but it did move slightly westerly, and so.
Yeah. Well, when you say we have to go out and check the traps and we check the trees, how big is that staff?
So our staff is about 30 people, our field crew, and then we have the people working on the research side, and so day to day they'll go out and do things like the tree surveys and the mulching, and definitely, of course, checking the traps.
So is this normal staffing levels, or is this new for the CRB response, or where does that support, where does that funding come from?
Darcy.
Or maybe Darcy could answer that.
So most of the funding comes from the U.S. Department of Agriculture right now, and some funding from the Hawaii Invasive Species Council and the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, and the DoD, the military, really puts in a fair chunk of money for their operations, and so this has been really a model of a long-term collaborative project that has been exceedingly successful, and we are fortunate that the military and this partnership really works so well, because we would be dealing with a totally different situation if it had started off base, or the military had not been as responsive and assisting us and really keeping it on base for 2 years, definitely.
Well, it sounds like the program that you've set up is really quite good, and the trapping, great, and we go and follow up and we dig through mulch piles and look for that breeding population. What else do you do to try to get reports or find more populations or beetles?
So as far as our outreach efforts, I go out and I do presentations for really anybody who wants to know and learn about the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle. We are really targeting landscapers, anybody who's in the agriculture industry who might have their hands in the dirt, in the soil, and certain things like compost, where they would be able to see the larva or different kind of life stages. Also, of course, nurseries such as palm nurseries, that they would be directly affected by this beetle. They would see the damage on the trees. So anybody that really is affiliated with those types of industries, but even down to children and just the general community. So we are really trying to educate them about why it's important, and also what they can do to help, of course. And really what we're garnering for is for the community to report things such as damage. If they are able to capture it, we really would like for them to capture the beetle. We do experiments back at the lab, of course, in trying to figure out different ways to get rid of the beetle. So really capturing, monitoring, and checking for damage and things like that. Any kind of sightings, even if they thought that they saw it flying around, is really important for us to figure out what's going on with the population, and to try and get rid of it.
Yeah. So I have the $1 million question for whoever wants to take a stab at it. What are the chances of eradication?
At
Darcy?
this point in time, we have a good chance. We're at a key point, I think, where we have to make some big decisions. But this is more about what we're willing to commit to the effort. If we commit more, we have a really good chance of eradicating, even in areas that are difficult, in areas adjacent to Joint Base Pearl Harbor on the west side or at Nanakuli. That's going to require greater participation from really everyone across the board, and a little bit more money. But when we look at the costs of what happens if we lose coconuts, or what happens if we lose some of our other palm trees, and the look and the changing look and feel of what Hawaii will look like, I think it's worth that extra cost in order to make this program a success. So we can eradicate, I think, at this point. Just keep in mind that for us, that's like a 3 to 5 year project.
Yeah. Eradication is a really short word for a long process. That's what
Yeah.
I've learned.
And the key thing is, because this beetle is so long-lived, when we reach that happy point, and unfortunately the lieutenant colonel will probably be at a different duty station at that point in time, where we have a zero catch on Joint Base Pearl Harbor, we're still going to have to monitor that for 3 to 5 years to make sure. This is like when someone has cancer, and they go through their treatments and they're cancer-free. We're in that remission process, and that's where we want to get to before we give the all-clear signal.
Yeah. I think it's really critical that people realize what you've just said, in that you need the ability to continue to do what you're doing at the very minimum, and more if you hope for supporting that eradication attempt. And that eradication is going to be a more long-term thing, and it extends beyond people's duty stations, and it extends sometimes beyond political appointments or elected officials' tenure. And so, the work that you're doing and the outreach that you're providing, I think, is pretty critical to keep everybody just aware and still aligned and moving forward. So we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we are going to learn how you can help protect Hawaii from coconut rhinoceros beetle. Stay tuned. We are at that point in the program where we hear about what you can do to help with the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle program. And, there's everyone wants to think that, well, it's probably not near me. I'm probably never going to come into contact with those things. But just listen up. I think that there's some interesting things to learn here. So I'm going to start off with Kylie. What are a few of those things that people can do? You've put together a slide that helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so once again, we definitely want people to be reporting anything that really has to do with our program if they feel like it's important. Especially one thing is when you see a trap on the ground. That's one thing that we get a lot of calls for, and obviously a trap on the ground does absolutely nothing for our program. So just call it in to describe the general location, and we should be able to find that, and so that we can get that fixed and rehung. So another thing once again, is to report any kind of damage possible damage, whatever you think. The best thing, the easiest thing is just to take a picture of it, and you can send it to our phone. I have it on another slide, but it's 679-5244. That one can receive text messages. Otherwise, you can email it to stoprhino@gmail.com.
So people could just use their smartphone and just, wow, okay, awesome.
So that's an easy way to report something. And also, once again, if they are able to catch it, but also, you know, we might want to mention that these beetles are not the cleanest things, so we recommend to use gloves or try not to touch it if possible. This thing is not, you know, a crazy beetle where it's just going to fly all over the place and it's like one of those scary cockroaches or something. So if you see it, it's actually likely to be moving really slow and it's pretty gentle, so you just got to kind of scoot it into like a hard plastic container or a glass container. Obviously, if they can get through, bore through coconut fronds, they're pretty strong. So
Don't put it in a cardboard box, right?
Definitely. So definitely checking things like mulch piles and compost piles. That's their favorite place to be in, to breed, and to live out their life cycle. So just making sure that all of that kind of material, green waste, is clear of any life stages. And if you do see something that is suspicious that you might think, then definitely try and take a picture of it, report it to us, and then we'll try and identify it for them.
Yeah, you know, I talk a lot with folks that garden and do landscape industry work, and they are always coming and saying, well, I found this really big white larvae in the soil, in the compost I was digging. Is that coconut rhinoceros beetle? And from what we understand, that the oriental flower beetle, which is a much smaller beetle, the one that Darcy was talking about with the white speckles on its back, does the same thing. It lays its eggs in the compost and it develops there. So how do people tell the difference? Do you want to give us a quick cheat sheet answer for, you know, should I be super duper concerned or?
Yeah, so one of the easiest ways, in my opinion, to tell the difference between the two is actually if you were to lay it on a flat surface for the larva. The oriental flower beetle larva will actually flip on its back and it kind of crawls in a straight line, and whereas the coconut rhinoceros beetle would lay on its side and crawl. And it's kind of strange that beetles do it differently like that, but that's one of the ways to tell the difference. Another way to tell the difference is actually if you were to see kind of on the underside of the oriental flower beetle larva, at the end of their body, they have a tiny little line on there.
They're ocole.
Yeah, they have a line on the end. And so, you know, if you're ever wondering if any kind of larva should be reported, just in case. Because even for us back at the office, sometimes we can get a little confused with it as well. So really any kind of larva should be reported, and then we can usually pretty easily identify what it is.
So the flower beetle has the line.
And crawls on its back.
And crawls on its back, okay. Do they have to touch it to do that? They can use their trowel, right? They can
Gloves or anything like that.
Yeah. And so I'm a little concerned. You know, we talked a little bit about Joint Base and how a lot of that green waste is managed. What about what can homeowners do in the areas surrounding Joint Base all the way out through Nanakuli? Do you have any recommendations for compost piles, or how can people just help?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so we have a lot of green waste, especially out Nanakuli side. And the best way is get rid of it. And don't just go get rid of it, dump it illegally or anything. Give us a call, let us know. We can help check it out. If it's clean, then take it to H-Power or to Hawaiian Earth Products, the Green Waste Recycling Center, and they can take care of it. But if you don't want to do that, if you're able to turn your compost, green waste is valuable. We know that. People want to grow with it. But we've actually been able to control small populations of the beetle and get rid of it by just repeatedly turning the material, and that this disrupts the life cycle of the beetle. So what we want to do is hear from the public so we can check out the material and we can best advise how how to proceed from there.
Wonderful. Well, that contact information is on your screen. I'd like to thank my panelists for being here today. I appreciate your time and sharing your mana'o with us. I'd also like to thank the Leeward Community College Educational Media Center crew for helping us put these programs together. If you're interested in our other programs, we are talking about things like rapid ohia death, biofouling, which is the stuff that rides in on the outsides of ships and vessels. And we're also talking about little fire ants. So check out our other programs in the series Line in the Sand. I'd also like to thank the Hawaii Invasive Species Council for funding this program, and most particularly you for watching. Mahalo.